I have two questions about page 24. The first was the legislation requiring parental consent. Again, I think parental consent is necessary for something like this, but you're just, like, that wouldn't limit us from changing our policies internally. I could someday move to change our policies internally, and it wouldn't affect this, right? Again.
I hesitate to say that in regards to special education. It's kind of because special education falls under so many legal requirements. So I would hesitate to say we could just change our policies because I think we're very dictated by state and federal law in regards to that.
Good morning, almost. For the record, Bobby Pedrick, Director of Special Education. I'm sorry. Could someone repeat the question?
Yes. Okay. And again, I'm sorry if this is coming out not as articulate as it would be earlier in the evening. On page 24, I personally have a problem with, under AACPS opposes, I personally have problems with the second and the fourth bullet, if I'm being real, and actually the first as well, but mostly the second and the fourth bullet. That would be like legislation requiring parental consent for changes to student placements and special ed services. And as you know, I was just off the trail, so I heard a lot about special ed over the last year, and I would be a proponent of requiring parental consent. And the other thing is the expansion of the categories under which a student is eligible to receive protections. Yeah, of course, I'm a proponent of that too. So
okay,
I'm not sure I want that in there, either one.
I'll begin with the simpler response, perhaps. The fourth bullet, we mirror the categories that are mandated by federal law, and those are the categories that allow us to receive funding from the federal and state governments. And so if we were to create another category, it wouldn't be officially accredited by the federal government. Okay, and then
so we would not be eligible for federal funds.
No, and it wouldn't be recognized if we were to identify if we as a state or a county came up with new categories, and then that child moves to another state or even another county, they may not be able to receive services under that category. So it's practice to remain consistent with the federal government. And
sorry, but what if I want the state to expand the categories?
Then I think there'd be some lobbying at the state level.
Well, right. So then why would I, if I'm, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the body, obviously, this is just me personally. I'm not afraid to go on record on any of this stuff, but if I'm personally a proponent of expanding categories under which our students provide services in support of their education, then why would I want that written down in this program that we as a body are supposed to agree to?
Well, you can oppose it and you can make a motion to remove it, but it would be up to this body to if
sure.
they want to leave that in there. And they're
well then for the sake of time, I know it's late, I move to strike both the second and the fourth bullet on those grounds.
I'm sorry. I'd like to respond to the question about the second bullet, but I also on the fourth bullet, there are many categories that they encompass a lot of different types of disabilities. So I've worked in 4 large school systems for 36 years in the field of special education, and I'd say I've never experienced us having a hardship identifying a child under one of those categories. So for example, multiply disabled. I mean, a lot of things fall under that. Other health impaired, a lot of different types of disabilities fall under that. Even learning disabilities can encompass a lot of different types of students. So, and then the second bullet, that is a very large conversation, as you know. Basically, the law that was put into place as of July 1 for parental consent requires that we now, as a school system, have a choice. If the educational experts at an IEP meeting recommend a different type of environment or a different type of curriculum for a student, then if the parents do not agree with that, then we are put in a position where we have two options. One is maintain that child in their current environment, which clearly they're not being successful in according to the educational experts, because that's why they recommended a change, or take those parents to due process, which puts us in a very challenging position. Because if the child's not being successful and making progress on their goals and objectives on the IEP in the current setting, we have a responsibility to respond to that. And so if the response is that we believe that child's needs could be better met in a different curriculum or an alternate placement, and the parents don't agree to that, then we have no option. Our two choices are leave the child in their current setting knowing they're failing, knowing they're struggling, and quite frankly, oftentimes behaviors are escalating because they're frustrated, or take them to court.
I guess I see this from an opposing view where a family is in an IEP meeting and the school system is considering removing services. Yeah, my brain is going really slowly right now, and then those, because I've heard of several. Obviously, I just came off the trail, so I've heard of this over and over and over again over the last year. And I'm downright opposed to that without parental consent. It's the removal. It's not the adding of services I'm worried about. It's from the perspective of removal of services without parental consent.
So we also have a responsibility to service children in the least restrictive environment, and providing specialized instruction to a student who doesn't meet the criteria by federal and state law, we're doing a disservice to them by pulling them or by doing specialized instruction with them when they don't warrant that. There was a time in my career when parents didn't want their children to be identified as having a special need, and that pendulum has swung, and we now have a lot of parents who see their children as more disabled than maybe they are, or having a disability when they maybe don't have a disability or don't have an academic impact from a disability. And so
no, I follow you.
Okay.
And, I know it's late, so I'm not going to, beat this into the ground, but I stand on record as being opposed to the second and the fourth bullet. That's my personal opinion. I'd stick by it.
Ms. Antoine.
It's almost midnight, and I have some things I wanted to add to that as the discussions are going on. As an aunt of two special needs, my nephews, some of the things that you brought up are very true, and it becomes complicated, and unfortunately, in many cases, in all of them, the ones taking the brunt end are the ones suffering with the disability, and I'm concerned too, as Dana is, that we miss the mark on that if we go in opposing this with this level of restriction. I would request that it be adjusted to be more flexible, in consideration that so many circumstances could result in some differences that hurt rather than help in the child in either case. All right, so page 30.
Ms. Anton, did you say page 30?
Yeah. Are we still on 24?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
May I introduce something else?
Oh,
or
yeah, I
no?
apologize.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, if I have a question on 24.
Oh, I'll definitely digress to let you continue.
Ms. Ellis.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to step in. I just figured on that topic. Okay, so I too am very uncomfortable with bullet 2, but I want to ask a question about bullet 4. not creating another category does not prevent us from coming up with some sort of program or educational support if we identify some new type of issue, or am I correct?
You are correct.
We can handle that without.
Yes, we could handle that under the current categories and the current IEP process.
Okay, I just wanted to get that.
And just to add to that, as Ms. Hummer stated earlier, this is really looking at it at the state level, right? This is your local board authority and governance. And while we may agree to this, and I will say that even when we oppose testimony, I try to do a good job of saying, while we like the idea, and oftentimes here at AACPS we're doing these things, it's not the state's purview to tell you, a board, what to do or to make it a statewide mandate. So that's really the difference there. It's kind of usurping on your authority as a board as well. So this doesn't limit the board. It's just telling the state that they can't mandate things upon you as a board and us as a school system.
And I would add on the parental consent element, that there are definitely, and we all have heard of them, there's individual cases where there's disagreement that come on there, but this is the overall thing of doing, because this would not, if this law is passed, it wouldn't be just the individual cases that we really should look at as individually as a school system. Are we doing everything possible? It would be a blanket for all 9,000 of our special education students. It would be very broad to have this. I'm personally more in favor that, and I believe Bobby's team is always trying to do this, that we make our IEP meetings and our work with the students more and more collaborative, and be looking at those individual cases where things aren't going, what can we do as a school system to breach those? If this is put in place, it almost automatically creates an adversarial role right from the bat on both sides. It could be people becoming defensive, whereas we definitely want it to be a more of a collaborative experience from the beginning. And I would be more on the local level, that we'd be looking at the individual cases and trying to improve those rather than having a blanket statement from the state for everyone.
It may be helpful for the board members to be aware of the fact that the current parental consent law pertains to about 1% of the special education population. So it's our most severely disabled children. And that, I was part of that task force at the state level, and it came up because in a few counties in Maryland, they were putting children in more restrictive settings without notifying the parents and without it even being a team effort. And Anne Arundel County is the state mandate is that we service as a state under 1% of our students in that category. And Anne Arundel County is the only large school system that still remains under 1%. So we're very close, we're 0.98. But what that says is we do not have a history in this school system of quote unquote dumping children into a more restrictive setting. We work really hard to not do that. So I think philosophically this county is in good position to not abuse that. And the other thing that might help is that we've expanded our Partners for Success program we started it last year, where we now have 3 teams servicing the county. So 6 adults who are teams made up of a parent of a student with a special need and a former educator, or an educator who's just not working in the field, and they're working very closely with parents, and that's part of our effort to build those relationships and work collaboratively. My feeling when I was on this task force is I don't need a law to tell me to do what's right for children. But I do understand that there are families who did need that. And I'm proud to say that Anne Arundel County was not a county that was having people represent that their children were put in placements without parent involvement.
So is there any more discussion on page 24? All right, Ms. Antoine, I think you want to go to page 30.
Yes, please. I would just request an administrative change where we have the diversion of public education identified, that each time we refer to it as public education funds rather than public funds, to encourage other resources to support non-public schools. So in other words, for example, where AACPS believes, the diversion of public